Howdy, I'm Jacob, and you're watching the Prepper's Bunker Outdoors. Today we are here to talk about the Reiff Knives F6. Absolutely love this belt knife. And if you want some tunes during your video, go to Sword of the Highlands by Man of War. Start off at about 1:33 and get your enjoyment on, as I am trying to do myself. So what we've got here is a absolutely fantastic American-made Grail status belt knife from Reiff Knives. I'm going to play some clips for you. We're going to show some specs, and we're going to start talking about my initial impressions of this blade. Alright, so this is my initial impressions video. If you're not familiar, I've been using the Reiff Knives F4 for a very long time, and so I feel very familiar with this F6 out of the box. I've done some batoning with this thing, obviously some feather sticks and some firecraft and stuff. But again, being an initial impressions video, we're really just talking today about how I feel about it off the bat. Now, if you want to understand how this channel works, in about a year, what you'll see is a long-term review of this knife. If we've had any problems, that's where I'll talk about that, and we'll talk about whether or not my initial impressions were correct, whether or not I need to eat crow, etc. That will actually usually be a quicker video than my initial impressions video. But for today, like usual, we're going to start from the blade and work our way back. We have a very slightly hollow ground edge, not enough to have any of the weaknesses of a hollow grind. Really, it's quite slight. However, behind the edge, we're at about 35, 36 thou, which I think is about standard for a knife like this. This knife will, however, due to that light hollow grind, perform a little bit better at 35 or 36 thou than a flat ground knife would, because you're going to have less resistance when you go past the micro bevel. So it is being CPM 3V, we still have an absolute tank of a knife, no doubt about it. I wouldn't have any issues rocking and rolling with this thing as a belt knife in any situation. But we do have a fine enough edge to be comfortable for daily tasks. Now, being that this is hollow ground, if you wanted to bring your behind the edge thickness down a little bit, that would be very easy to do. You pop off that shoulder right there, and you'd very quickly be looking at 30 thou or maybe 28 thou behind the edge, and you'd have quite a slicey knife. I would rate this knife on a scale of an obtuse axe to a slicey butcher's knife or surgeon's scalpel, right down the middle, just right down the center. So very, very practical. All right, now I'm going to talk about the spine as we are talking about the blade, because it's something that I personally use for striking a ferro rod. Like usual today, we are using my Exotac ferro rod here that I've been using for literally forever. And so you'll see here, when I use the factory edge, which feels squarish, I get a little bit of sparking. And it was enough in this situation to get the jute twine in my tinder bundle lit. However, in my experience using natural materials that are gathered on site, the amount of sparks that I get off the factory spine is not what I want. So I had Ross Gammons at Dry Creek Forge square this up for me. And with that being done, using my favorite method of striking a ferro rod, I was able to basically just launch fireballs with this thing. What I want to see, if a knife is designed to be used from the factory with a ferro rod, what I want to see is I want to see a long length of my ferro rod being shaved off, almost like a feather on a feather stick, and the entire length of the thing burned for like a solid second, molten hot. I don't want to just see a couple small sparks. So you do have a ferro rod holder on the sheath. We'll talk about the sheath later. But if you want this to be your go-to knife or method to use with a ferro rod, I would sharpen that spine up. Now, you don't have to use your knife as your striker. You can get a Sawzall blade as a striker that has no weight, no bulk, no cost. You can attach it to your sheath, no problem. You can carry a striker. You can do a lot of other things. So this isn't a deal breaker, but I like my spine square, and I do prefer when my knives come sharply square. The handle of all Reiff knives is where the money's at here. The handle gives the knife a balance that's rather handle heavy. The knife melts into your hand due to the balance being handle heavy, but also due to the shape of the scales. These are micarta, and so micarta is more of a recent addition for Reiff. Usually it's G10, which is even slightly heavier than micarta. And so I often hear people pick up a knife or do a review and say, this balance is just perfect. There's no such thing as perfect balance in any knife. There is balance that is perfect for an intended task. Now, this knife with a 6-inch blade is very clearly not a chopper. It should be very clear. This is a belt knife, and I can whack through some small branches or do whatever I need to do, but if I'm actually sitting here chopping, this is not an efficient option. Therefore, by having a more handle-heavy balance, we may lose some chopping performance, but since there's no real chopping performance in a knife of this size anyways, what it gives you is an incredible feeling of security and control when using the blade. It makes it feel more like an extension of your hand. And so between the handle scales here and the handle and the shaping and the blade, what you start getting is an overall feeling for fit and finish that is just absolutely superb. With that being said, let's talk about the sheath. All right, so for your sheath here, you get a Kydex unit. I already alluded to the fact earlier that it does have a ferro rod loop. It is absolutely a serviceable sheath. Click in, not really a click out, but that's all right. You get a nice push on the way out. It's a nice sheath. There are a few things that I would change. So for one, it can almost feel a little bit rattly, and if I were to launch this thing, I would lose the knife. Let's be realistic. Is that absolute hold on Kydex a necessity? I'm a knife snob. I am knife spoiled. I have some of the best knives that a guy can have, and I have way too many of them. So it is something that I've become accustomed to, but I don't believe that you would ever have this knife come out of the sheath while running or anything else. It's certainly good enough. The clip here, I generally don't like clips. That's just me. Unless they have a mechanical lock like an Ulti clip. This one, I do feel like it's worked. It's worked, and a clip sure is convenient. It really is convenient to put it on and off the belt. It's very reminiscent to me of a Tops Kydex sheath, but better. So the overall feel of it, the overall aesthetic here looks to me like something that Tops would have done, except for it looks to me like the guys at Reiff care a lot more about their sheaths. So overall it is nice, but it is not a Grail level sheath. How many people, let's just say this, if you've got enough money to buy a Reiff, you've most likely prioritized it because you're a knife nerd. If you're a knife nerd, you're much more likely to be inclined to buy a custom Kydex sheath regardless of the price that you paid for the knife. So how many people are going to be inclined to get an aftermarket Kydex sheath for this? I would say not very many. I would say there will be a few out there that are either so picky or love a sheath maker that they will replace this sheath. On the flip side of that, in my opinion, being a knife nerd, any knife that you use a lot and love deserves a custom Kydex sheath. So I think we'll see a couple. I wouldn't say that it's necessary. It's a decent sheath. The other thing that I would change is I just can't help but feel like the Ferro Rod holder is a little bit far from the sheath. I can't help but feel like that's a little bit odd. I don't know why, actually. I mean, it completely works. It makes sense. It's not bad. I don't know. I almost feel like it just sticks out of there. Maybe I'm going to move it down a notch or two. Maybe that would... I don't even know what I'm talking about. Overall appeal, guys. This knife, when you grab it, the fit and finish, what your hand tells you, more your eyes are subjective, especially with the F4. I've had a lot of people say they hated the F4 because of the balance of the length of the blade as contrasted to the balance of the length of the handle, which I absolutely love. But your eyes are going to tell you one thing, but what's your hand going to tell you? This knife feels absolutely premium. There is undoubtedly an exceptional amount of attention to detail in this blade. It is a production knife that rivals a amazing custom knife. It's far better than a lot of custom knives, honestly. I would say it's far better than 98% of custom knives, because although you and me might know a bunch of custom knife makers and that's what we think of when we think of custom knives, there's actually like 16 billion really awful custom knife makers that we don't think of. But anyways, it's, I would say, definitely better than the vast majority of custom knives, and it is expensive. However, it's obtainable. There are other custom brand, or there are other production brands, and I'm not convinced that they offer a better product, but you have to wait 5 or 6 years to get one, potentially. The Reiff is a nice balance of price and realistic availability. I really love this knife. And unless so this knife overall, but what is it for? Overall, this knife I do not believe is specialized for anything. Maybe I could say specialized for bushcraft, but what does that actually mean? Okay. I believe that this knife is primarily meant to be versatile. So if I only had this knife and it was going to be my skinner, would that be ideal? No. If I only had this knife and I was going to try and get a fish fillet, would that be ideal? No. If I only had this knife and I was trying to do intricate carving, no. My primary wood knife, well, I like something bigger. I like to do a bit of chopping, so again, no. However, if this is the only knife that I had on my belt, I would feel confident that, although I might not be able to do anything pretty, which I'm used to already, I could do anything that I need to do. I think that this knife will excel absolutely everywhere. If you have a favorite Tops or maybe an SE6 or something like that, a more standard production knife, and you've thought, I want a production knife that does everything nicer, this is at the absolute top of my list, guys. I'm a huge fan of this thing. So what I'm going to do, I will put some links to Reiff in the description box below. Make sure to check that out. Everything that Stu at Reiff does is fantastic. He is working on new stuff. He does special drops. He does special handle colors. It's all good. The dude, listen, I don't know this guy this personally, but when somebody has a product that comes out like this, I feel pretty comfortable to say that the guy behind the scenes has got to be pretty anal about what he likes and how good things need to be. Just a fantastic setup. So yeah, links will be in the description box for following or whatever. I'm stoked on the long-term review. You will see this in classes. You will see this on Instagram if I'm allowed to continue being on Instagram. It will pop up over and over again as I continue to use it and to get B-roll for the future video. But that's all I have got. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I think I might do a favorite 6-inch knife video, speaking of the blade, and this knife will absolutely be featured in that video. Overall, I'm stoked on it. Are you stoked on it? I know that there are some Reiff haters out there. Are you among them? Let me know in the comment section below, and as always, I'll talk to you there.